my name's Martin. I work for Abri's Employment Support Service and my role is as a lead employment coach. So I work with our customers to try and support them to move into employment, as well as overseeing a number of different projects in South Somerset which are focused around employment support and getting people into work or training. Yeah, so I think the top tips and the thing that a lot of people sometimes forget when it comes to preparing for interviews is to really be your authentic self and take your authentic self into an interview. And what I mean by that is to not focus too much on the skills or the experience that perhaps you don't have, but to really make the most of the skills and the experience that you do have. So when it comes to preparing, I think sometimes we focus too much on preparing set answers for questions that actually may not come up in an interview. And I think you're better off preparing lots of different examples of times when you've demonstrated the skills that they've asked for in the job advert, and times when you might have done some of the key duties that are in that role. And if you've got 4 or 5 really strong examples which show how you're the right person for that job, then that's a really good place to start. One of the other main things that we look to try and get people to do when it comes to interview prep is actually taking a look at the organisation that you're applying for, learning some key facts about how long that organisation's been running, how many staff they may have, what their future ambitions are, and then what the values and the behaviours that that employer expects. So on most business websites, on the About Us page, which is often at the bottom of a company website, you'll see lots of key information about the types of person that employer is looking for. And if you can, again, show examples of times when you've used those values and the behaviours that they're looking for, quite often that's one of the key things employers will be looking for. Yeah, I think that there are a few definite don'ts when it comes to going into an interview. I think that the most important thing that you need to do is treat everybody with respect that you meet within the organisation. So we can sometimes get really hung up on making a really good first impression to the person that's interviewing us, but we then forget that we might have walked all the way through an office building or a site where you're meeting who your potential colleagues are going to be if you're successful in the interview. So from the minute you get in the door, or even in the car park of the organisation, you need to be focusing on making a really strong first impression. I think when we're all naturally going to get nervous when it comes to going into an interview situation as well, and it's really important to try not to let your nerves show too much, and you'll want to practice some different techniques for that before going into the interview. There's no right or wrong way to go about it, but it's just really important that you are aware of how you're feeling and how you're communicating. So for me, I have a tendency, if I feel nervous, to speak really quickly, and actually it can be hard to follow what I'm saying. So I'm conscious now whenever I'm in a situation like an interview or a presentation and I've got those nerves, to really slow down my communication so that it's clear for everybody. Another thing you don't want to do is get too focused on talking too much but not about the job. So I once went to an interview and spent half an hour talking about football, and I left and I thought, wow, that interview was great. We got on really well. I'm definitely going to get the job. But then when I was driving home, I was thinking, actually, I've not sold myself, my skills. I've not given all of these examples that I've prepared before going into the interview. And suffice to say, I didn't get the job, although we did have a great chat about football. So, but it's about learning and reflecting on those things and thinking, well, what can I do better next time? Nobody's going to have a 100% success rate when it comes to interviews. So I think it's just really important that you go into it with the mindset of, I want to get the job. That's obviously the main reason that you're going, but what am I going to learn from this experience and what can I do better next time? What to wear is a really difficult one. And actually this has changed quite a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, where a lot of employers have changed their kind of in-work uniform kind of policies and stuff like that. So I think if possible, if you know a little bit about the organisation that you're applying for, you can get a general sense as to what the dress code that employer kind of expects. So we used to be shirts and ties here, for example, as an organisation, and now it's a little bit more informal. But you couldn't come into an interview just because it was informal in a t-shirt and shorts. You know, you do have to be sensible, you have to be smart, well presented. But it is more about looking at the people around you. And I'd almost advise go one up from kind of who's around you, if that makes sense. So if you're applying somewhere on a building site, for example, we would never recommend going in a shirt and tie and smart shoes for that interview. But at the same time, you wouldn't go in your dirty work clothes. So it's about finding the right balance, being well presented, and trying to reflect, again, the values and the uniform policy of the organisation you're applying for. I think asking questions about the business and the company, or perhaps the team that you're applying for. So what does the next 5 years look like for the company that you're applying for? Have they got plans to grow, or actually are they looking to improve in any particular areas? And then drilling down and focusing that into the team that you're applying for and the role that you're going to be doing. So what does that role actually look like? Usually, if you've applied for a job, you've had a couple of sentences from a job description to look over. It's very hard to explain everything that you're going to be doing on a piece of paper. So I think asking questions and being interested in the type of work that you're going to be doing every day to kind of interview the employer and get an idea of, is this actually the job I thought it was? Am I going to be doing what I was expecting? You know, is the split, if it's a customer facing role, for example, with an element of admin behind it, you know, is it 90% working with customers and 10% admin? Or actually is it 90% admin and very little customer contact? So it's, I think, asking questions to try and understand where the team's going, where the company's going, and what that job actually looks like, so that you look interested and keen to get started is a good starting point. You may have some other natural questions when you've come to looking over, you know, the company website, for example. If there's a great project that they've been involved in the past, ask, you know, it shows willing that you've looked into the company. Are you going to be doing a project like that again? If so, it's something I'd love to get involved in. Would this role allow me to do that? Questions like that just show that you've done your research and that you're keen to not just come in and do your job, but to go the extra mile. I think it really depends on the type of skills that you're looking to develop. I think we can get too hung up on kind of, I never recommend people to practice answers for specific questions, because I think sometimes it can just come across that you're reading a script, and I can't stress enough, like, you need to be your authentic self in an interview. The more natural you are, the less kind of, in many ways, the less scripted your answers are, is often, you know, for the best, because you can then show your personality a little bit more. But I think you need to just put yourselves in situations where you're, you know, if you're nervous or anxious about things, where you're trying to overcome that and learn techniques to address, you know, the way that your nerves come across in an interview. So some people might need to sit on their hands, for example, to stop themselves from biting their nails. It's finding something that works for you. But I also would always recommend just rehearse and learn those examples that you've thought about when it comes to your skills and your experiences. So they're really in your head and at the front of your mind in an interview, because you need to call on them throughout most of the interview. So it's just learning exactly what it is that you want to get across. And if you get to the interview and you've not been able to tell that great story about that great piece of work that you've done, find a way to get that in there, because you don't want to leave, go home and then regret not getting that across. So if you've had the interview and you've unfortunately not been successful in applying for the role, you are always entitled, and we would encourage you to seek feedback from the employer about how you could maybe do better next time. But what we do find, in all honesty, is a lot of employers are very busy and sometimes they can't provide you that feedback. So it's always worth trying to get in touch. You can send an email if that's your preference, but if you've got somebody's phone number, we'd always recommend just picking up the phone and seeing if you can get some feedback, if you feel that you're ready to do that and have a positive conversation, because you have to be ready to potentially hear something that you might not want to hear, but that's going to help you to be more successful in your next interview for a role. But something that's quite important is just having a bit of self-reflection, actually taking time to sit down after the interview, whether that's when you're travelling home or once you get home, to just really think about the answers that you gave. Did you get those examples across? Were you focused in on the job role, or did you get distracted by the football or something else? And just reflecting and thinking really honestly how you feel that went, so that you can learn how you're going to kind of do better next time.